Hello, this is Judy, and for the next hour, I will be reading articles from the December 22nd, 2025 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I will do my best to pronounce all names and words, yet please forgive me if I do not. So, our first article is under federal politics, and the title is What's It Like Being Elected in Your Early 20s? Canada's first MPs born in the 21st century weigh in. Nearly 8 months after they were first elected, Liberal MPs Faris Al-Soud, S-O-U-D, Tatiana Auguste, A-U-G-U-S-T-E, Jake Swatowski, S-A-W-A-T-Z-K-Y, and Amandeep Sohi, S-O-D-H-I, sat down with the Star. And there's a picture of the four of them and their faces. They're laughing and in good spirits. And it's a picture of all of them. And that picture was taken by James Park for the Toronto Star. And this article is written by Mark Ramsey of the Ottawa Bureau. Ottawa. Minutes before the House of Commons rose for the holiday break, 4 rookie Liberal MPs huddled in one of their offices and debated a surprisingly difficult question: how they wanted to pose on camera. Should they look serious, make a funny face, or a mix of both? One of them, Quebec MP Tatiana Auguste, jokingly suggested that they take the office couch and, in quotes, move this to the middle of the street so they could mimic the iconic shot from Friends. None of them had been born when the popular sitcom first aired in 1994. For transparency's sake, neither had this reporter. The group of 4, Auguste, Mississauga's Faris Al-Soud, BC's Jake Swatowski, and Brampton's Amandeep Sohi, were all elected for the first time in April, and together they made history. They are all the first Canadian MPs born in the 21st century. They are also, unofficially, the Liberal Party's, in quotes, Ute caucus, Jamaican Patois and Toronto slang for youth. The group uses as a tongue-in-cheek nickname while they navigate the halls of an institution often looked at as something you would arrive at only after decades of professional experience. Nearly 8 months later, the group sat down with the Star for a wide-ranging interview to reflect on what it has been like as members of Parliament in their 20s. The vibe between them is sibling-like. They tease one another constantly, but they are also each other's biggest supporters. They try to meet weekly for a group dinner. They all sit near one another in the House chambers. Swatowski and Sohi are, in fact, seatmates. And they are all, in small ways, still getting used to the fact that this is their life now. In quotes, "It's never a single moment," said Al-Soud, 25. "On a day-in, day-out basis, I'm mostly fine. But there will be something that happens over the course of the day, and then you'll realize, like, oh my God, I'm here." Auguste remembers an early moment like that as well. In quotes, "The first time you stand up in the house and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to put my feet down. I'm going to hope to God everything goes all right, because everybody's watching you, and it's like the first week. So everybody's like, who is this?" she recalled. "I remember doing a question. I don't remember how fast it was, but I remember just shaking and being next to Faris like, why did I say yes to this? It was so nerve-wracking." Swatowski, 25, describes Parliament Hill in more magical terms. "Walking around and looking at the Gothic architecture is, in quotes, like you're in Hogwarts," he said, referring to the magical boarding school in the Harry Potter books. "I have an office in Hogwarts? It's crazy," he said, getting a laugh from his colleagues. In quotes, "We're like Disneyland, but really serious." "Very serious," Auguste clarified. The group joins a list of other notable young MPs: Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, was 24 when he was first elected, and the party's House leader, Andrew Scheer, was 25. The youngest ever MP in Canadian history was Quebec New Democrat Pierre-Luc Dussault, Dusseault, who was elected as part of the Orange Wave in 2011 at 19 and served 2 terms. The first ever Gen Z MP in Canada is current Conservative Eric Melillo, Melillo, who was first elected in 2019. This year, 2 mid-20s Tories, BC's Sukhman Gill and Newfoundland's Jonathan Rowe, also joined the crew, though the Conservative Party did not respond to a request to interview the pair. It's a strange new life, the young MPs admit. Your time isn't really your own anymore, Swatakowski said. If you want to go see your family for dinner, you need to block that off in your schedule. And while they insist their colleagues take them seriously, sometimes they're mistaken as staffers. One time, Swatakowski said he was sitting in one of the small booths reserved for parliamentarians outside of the House chamber when a staffer opened the door and told him to leave because a minister had a meeting scheduled. She was like, "Just so you know, this is not for staff," Swatakowski said. Like, "Ma'am, I'm a member of the parliament." It's more awkward rather than something to be taken personally, so he said, though it does leave a chip on their shoulders. It's not hard to see why when looking at the circumstances of their elections, most of which were won with tight margins. Swatakowski, a mental health advocate who was planning to pursue a master's degree in counseling psychology, defeated Peter Julian, a popular New Democrat heavyweight who had been an MP since 2004. Sohi, 24, won her Brompton Centre riding by just a few hundred votes, surviving a big Conservative swing in the GTA. She did not find out she won until the day after the election when all votes had been counted in her riding. In quotes, "I think I slept like maybe half an hour that night because I was so anxious," Sodi said. Auguste, meanwhile, had initially thought she defeated a Bloc Québécois incumbent by merely 35 votes. Then Elections Canada flipped it back and said she lost by 44 votes. After an automatic recount more than a week after the April 28th election, a court returned the victory to her by a margin of a single vote. The drama didn't stop there. The Bloc is attempting to challenge the result after a Bloc voter revealed that her special ballot was not counted after an Elections Canada error. After the Quebec Superior Court rejected the request for a new election, the former Bloc MP said she would take the matter to the Supreme Court. Auguste, who said she can't discuss details of the matter, would only offer that it's been a whirlwind. She's been busy in Ottawa nevertheless. After getting lucky on the parliamentary lottery that establishes the list of MP-led bills, she's tabled her first legislation, a bid to establish a national strategy on flood and drought forecasting. They all share one key priority, representing the voices of youth in the halls of power. Something they all agree is the need to reach young people where they're at, especially on social media. In one such example last month, the group made a video playing on an online trend in which they passed the phone to one another and each highlighted aspects of the Liberal government's budget targeted towards youth. At the end, Al-Soud gives the phone to Defense Minister David McGuinty, 65, who jokingly puts the phone to his ear saying, in quotes, "Hello, who's there?" as if he does not know he's on camera. In quotes, "Not to be corny, because they're going to roast me forever, but this group is more like family than friends to me," Sodi said, reflecting on the group's growing friendship. Al-Soud doesn't wait for even a second before interjecting, "You're right, we will roast you for that." Mark Ramsey is a federal politics reporter in the Toronto Star Parliament Hill Bureau. You can reach him via email at mramzy@symbol thestar.ca. This next article is in sport, and it's about the Raptors. Raptors 905 continue undefeated 16-game run to advance to G League Winter Showcase Final. Jonathan Mogbo, Mogbo, scored a game-high 21 points and 11 rebounds, while Alaha Martin and AJ Lawson added 18 points and 14 points, respectively. And there's a picture of a basketball player, and it's a Raptors 905 guard, Ala Martin, shown in action last month, had 18-point Sunday against Grand Rapids. And this article is written by Gilbert Nagbo, NGABO sports reporter. And the photograph of Ala Martin was taken by Giovanni Caprioti, Caprioti, and it's a file photo for the Toronto Star. Okay, this Raptors 905 team just can't seem to lose. The Raptors G League affiliate is heading to the Winter Showcase Final with an unblemished 16-0 record after surviving perhaps its biggest test Sunday in a hotly contested semifinal against the Grand Rapids Gold, affiliated with the Denver Nuggets. With the outcome in doubt until the dying seconds, the Raptors 905 came through to secure a gritty 103-101 victory. The win came 2 days after they fought back against the San Diego Clippers in the quarterfinals, a game in which they trailed 25-6 before managing to build a double-digit lead and win 110-89. Jonathan Mogbo scored a game-high 21 points and 11 rebounds, while two-way players Ala Martin and AJ Lawson added 18 points and 14 points respectively. It's the first time the Raptors 905 have made it to the final of the Winter Showcase as an in-season tournament where all teams converge in one city to play in front of scouts from all 30 NBA teams, and they're one win away from hosting the trophy and a $100,000 prize. They'll face the Salt Lake City Stars on Monday at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando. This next article is an opinion article, and the title is Canada Doesn't Need Another Headline About Doctors. It Needs a Plan. And there's a picture of a doctor with a patient and taking information, and the quote says, Canada's problem is not a lack of potential physicians, but a failure of planning and foresight, writes Dr. Debakantana Jena, and that's Debakantana, and that's the person who wrote this article, is a contributor. And Dr. Jena is a chief of orthopedic surgery at Medicine Hat Regional Hospital, associate professor at the University of Calgary, and a first-generation immigrant to Canada. In May, 96-year-old retired teacher Dorothy Lamont placed a small classified ad in the Halifax Chronicle Herald titled, in quotes, seeking a physician. After nearly 3 years without a family doctor, she wrote that she was, in quotes, in the 80,000s on Nova Scotia's wait list. I do not know Ms. Lamont, but I know her story. I see versions of it every week. Seniors waiting half a day in emergency rooms, families delaying care, conditions becoming dangerous because nobody has the time or continuity to intervene. Against that reality, Ottawa announced 5,000 permanent resident spots for international doctors, along with a new application stream and promises of 14-day processing. But permanent residence is not a license to practice medicine. A work permit is not a training pathway. None of this creates residency positions, expands assessment capacity, or increases supervised integration, steps needed to determine whether physicians can safely join a publicly funded system. And It leaves untouched the most glaring fact. More than 13,000 internationally trained physicians already live in Canada without any pathway to practice. Before adding thousands more, we should ask why so many here cannot even be assessed. For years, immigration has been the quickest lever for government, even as unplanned growth strained healthcare, classrooms, and social supports. A new announcement cannot fix a physician shortage that population policy helped expose. As someone who trained in India, England, and Canada, and who teaches and trains medical students and family doctors and examines surgeons for the Royal College, I understand what standards require and why Canadians depend upon them. As a medical leader for more than a decade, I have seen how systems work and how they fail. And when I volunteered in the COVID wards to support colleagues, I saw what happens when a system without capacity reaches its limits. Canada's problem is not a lack of potential physicians, but a failure of planning and foresight. We have excellent universities, committed faculty, and thousands of talented young Canadians who aspire to serve their communities, yet entry into the Canadian medical school remains extremely restrictive. Training capacity has not expanded in proportion to population growth or need. Exceptional Canadian students are turned away, while to address shortages of our own, making we recruit urgently from abroad, often without sufficient capacity to assess training equivalency. This contradiction sits at the very heart of Canada's physician workforce crisis. We have the need, we have the talent, we have the institutions, but we have not connected the dots. It's time to build the system Canadians deserve. A real national strategy would be straightforward. First, expand Canadian medical training, not only in family medicine, but across specialties, so that within a decade we can have a cohort of homegrown physicians who understand our health system and our communities. Second, build rigorous, fair pathways for internationally trained physicians already here. Many will meet Canadian standards with structured evaluation or supervised integration. Third, when recruiting abroad, focus on jurisdictions with training already recognized as substantially equivalent so physicians can transition safely. None of this will work without supporting the physicians who train our next generation. Across Canada's universities and community hospitals, thousands of doctors teach, supervise, and assess trainees out of the commitment to their profession, often with little or no compensation. Their dedication is the backbone of medical training. Any serious plan must treat these educators as partners in planning, not an afterthought. This work is not glamorous. Workforce planning is meticulous, disciplined, and slow, the same qualities medicine demands. But if we commit to that work within the decade, Canada will have the stable, ethical, patient-centered workforce our communities deserve. When Ms. Lamont placed her advertisement, she was not asking for another headline about permanent resident spots. She was asking for continuity, for safety, for a doctor who could follow her over time. Announcements about immigration streams may grab headlines, but Canadians live in the consequences every day. This next article is under federal politics, and the title is Mark Carney names investment banker Mark Wiseman as the next U.S. ambassador. Wiseman will take the role on February 15th, replacing Kirsten Hillman, and will lead trade negotiations with the Trump administration. And there's a picture of Mr. Wiseman, and the caption states, Wiseman is a longtime friend of Carney, who was among the first to contribute to the Prime Minister's leadership bid. And this Toronto Star file photo was taken by Richard Lortens. And this article is written by Dylan Robertson of the Canadian Press, Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney is appointing a global investment banker and pension fund manager to be Canada's next ambassador in Washington. Carney's office says Mark Wiseman will take the role on February 15th, and he will be tasked with leading negotiations with the United States on the review of the Continental Free Trade Deal. Wiseman is a longtime friend of Carney, who was among the first to contribute to Carney's leadership bid, donating the maximum of $1,750 to that, as well as an additional $1,750 to the Liberal Party during last April's election campaign. He will replace Kirsten Hillman, who announced this month she would end her posting, saying that a new team would be able to focus on next year's review of the Canada-US-Mexico agreement. Wiseman is a member of Prime Minister's Council on Canada-US Relations, a body first created by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, just as Donald Trump was about to be sworn in as president for the second time. Trudeau did not include Wiseman on the council, but Carney added him to it just days after being sworn in as Prime Minister in March. This report by the Canadian Press was first published December 22nd, 2025. This next article is under business, and the title is Canada Post Union Reached Tentative Agreements. The parties have finalized contractual language for all issues apart from changes to the short-term disability program and personal days, which will be finalized by January 16, 2026. And this article is by the Canadian Press. Montreal. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says it has reached tentative agreements with Canada Post for the urban postal operations and rural and suburban mail carriers bargaining units. More will be coming on this. This next article is under a year in review. Oasis, a Daniel Caesar serenade, and a final farewell to Gilead, 9 Toronto culture highs of 2025. From a miraculous reprieve for a beloved dance stage to Mirvish embracing the Canadian spirit, star writers look back at the moments that defined the year. And there's different photos in the caption reads, a celebration at the newly renamed Sankofa Square, and that's Sankofa. Jonathan Church, the Stratford Festival's new artistic director, and Oasis performing at Rogers Stadium. And these photos were taken by R.J. Johnston. It's a Toronto Star file photo. Nick Osborne for the Toronto Star, and Sammy Kogan of the Canadian Press. And this article is written by Star staff. Mirvish embraces Canadian. Theaters should react to current events, but that's often a challenge for many companies because they program their seasons months, if not years in advance. Just look at the hashtag Elbows Up movement earlier this year, spurred by the ongoing trade war between Canada and the U.S. You would have been forgiven for thinking Toronto theater companies missed the memo. Canadian Stage might as well been renamed American Stage, with the number of American plays featured in its lineup. Soulpepper as well. So whether intentional or not, it was such a pleasant surprise to see Mirvish, Canada's largest commercial theater producer, program so many Canadian shows this year. From Britta Johnson's astounding, quotes, Life After, to the new Alan Doyle musical, in quotes, Tell Harbor. Even many of the American and British productions in the lineup featured all Canadian cast, including Anne Juliet, in quotes, and, in quotes, We Will Rock You, Joshua Chong. The Handmaid's Tale wraps up. Blessed be the fruit indeed, for a show that painted a vision of dystopian future that increasingly felt alarmingly close to our present reality, in quotes, The Handmaid's Tale was otherwise a remarkable bright spot in our cultural landscape. Bringing one of Margaret Atwood's famous novels to the screen was no small task, but over 6 seasons, the last airing this year, this show managed to capture both critics' hearts, see its 15 Emmy Awards and a record-breaking number of nominations, and speak to something in the zeitgeist, Zeitgeist. You know you've made an impact when the phrase, in quotes, it's like something out of The Handmaid's Tale, is meaningful to most people, regardless of whether they have a Crave subscription or not. Kudos to the show, major thumbs down to the actual state of our world right now. It also gave Toronto and surrounding areas a start turn. The show was filmed here, meaning our city and suburbs stood in for Gilead. While watching, often between our fingers, it was a fun game to spot the familiar landmarks. Oakville's Coronation Park, Toronto City Hall, half of Hamilton, and practically all of Cambridge, Ontario had starring cameos this series. Oasis Mania hits Toronto. As we enter the second half of the 2020s, charging fiercely forward through this wild decade, it's easy to forget how small the world has suddenly become during the pandemic just 5 years ago. How, for better or for worse, it temporarily narrowed the scope of our lives as we retreated indoors and into our tightly enclosed bubbles. Life is mostly back to normal now, but there remains a part of us that is not fully recovered from that unprecedented shock. We continue to crave experiences that orient us with a broader collective, and while we still desire the healing catharsis of a large-scale spectacle. If that sounds dramatic, please refer to the abundance of clips from the Oasis reunion tour, lovingly dubbed as, in quotes, the Eras Tour for Dads, which included 2 sold-out stops at the 50,000 capacity Rogers Stadium in Toronto last August. Both gigs went off without a hitch, which was a relief given A, the long history of Oasis shows going off the rails, including one in Toronto that ended when a fan assaulted Noel Gallagher, B, the logistical nightmares that plagued the early days of Rogers Stadium, and C, the terrifying and potentially disastrous prospect of placing tens of thousands of very drunk Gen X men in close proximity. What occurred instead was 2 nights of blissful, nostalgia-fueled euphoria, mobs of men and women decked out in 90s-inspired tracksuits and Kangol hats, K-A-N-G-O-L hats, dropping all pretension as they chanted alongside at the top of their lungs to songs of their youth, embracing one another in pouring rain. Though it was over almost as soon as it began, Oasis Mania felt like a reprieve from our difficult, divided times. The tour was enthusiastically hailed by Slate as, in quotes, a cure for the male loneliness epidemic, while Rolling Stone has said that the tour, in quotes, was all about positive masculinity. The tour's overwhelming success also seems to have inspired a slew of new megatours from aging rock bands. Rush is reuniting for 4 shows in Toronto in August, while AC/DC is set to perform at least 1 show at Rogers Stadium in September. Perhaps by next fall, rock and roll will have healed the world. And that's Richie Assay, A-S-S-A-L-Y, a reprieve for the Fleck. The pandemic was a death knell for dozens of arts venues across the city struggling with rising rents and declining audience attendance. In March, it looked like the Fleck Dance Theater was heading for a similar fate after the Harbor Center ended its decades-long lease for the 444-seat venue. The move was devastating for many companies that rented the theater, widely regarded as Toronto's most prestigious stage for contemporary dance. And at this time, no one knew whether the space would remain a theater or if its landlord would gut it entirely. But in November, it was announced that the venue would ultimately be saved and renamed the Terminal Theatre after its lease was taken over by the Toronto Stage Company. The theater reopened its doors earlier this month, with Toronto Stage Company founder John Chaiters promising a full season of 4 to 6 productions beginning next year. JC. Daniel Caesar delights Trinity Bellwoods. Ahead of his album release, quote, Song of Spergy, S-P-E-R-G-Y, Daniel Caesar, with fellow Toronto artist Mafusa the Poet, surprised Torontonians with a free, spontaneous concert in Trinity Bellwoods Park in September. The moment Caesar dropped the announcement on Instagram, fans swerved in droves. They converged on the park to hear his succulent vocals unveil new tracks, and revisit classics. While most settled onto the grass, others scrambled up trees for a better view of the serenade. One music lover even hauled a ladder across the park to catch the show. And this was written by Savannah Ridley. Stratford's new art director. After months of speculation, the British-Canadian theatre maker Jonathan Church was appointed the Stratford Festival's new artistic director in October, capping an 18-month international search to replace outgoing leader Antoni Cimolino, Cimolino. The announcement wasn't entirely surprising. Church is best known for turning around the fortune of the UK's Chichester Festival, another repertory company whose main stage is inspired by Stratford's Festival Theatre. The electrician-turned-director also maintains close relationships with many Canadian theatre leaders, including commercial director David Murish. But Church's appointment still marks a bold new era for Stratford, effectively Canada's de facto national theatre. In a wide-ranging interview with The Star earlier this fall, Church said he wants to broaden the company's reach, such as by attracting international actors and star directors. As well, he wants to extend the life of Stratford Productions beyond the festival's 4 stages. This marks a notable shift from Cimolino's tenure, which has increasingly focused on developing Canadian talent. But Church's vision is not without precedent and recalls the early days of Stratford, when stars like Brian Bedford and Maggie Smith regularly trot to the boards. In previous decades, it was also not uncommon for Stratford Productions to tour internationally or transfer to Broadway. The big question, however, is whether Church can help Stratford grow internationally and enter new markets while maintaining the artistic quality of its productions. We'll see. His first term will be in 2027, JC. Celebrating 25 years of Real World. Back in 2000, in quotes, The Young and the Restless star Tonya Williams saw a glaring lack of Canadian BIPOC talent in films. Fast forward 25 years, the trailblazing Real World Film Festival and Scream Institute marks its silver anniversary this October, proving its seminal impact on the industry. The organization has been a launchpad for hundreds of creatives, including Sim Liu, Marvel star, and one of the many Ken in the Barbieverse, and directors Richie Mehta, Mehta, and Alison Ducal, Ducal. The 25th anniversary celebration held at the Paradise Theatre showcased a new wave of Canadian film talent such as Vanessa Magic, Fitch Jean, and Adrian Bob. Cindy Lee's triumphant farewell. When Cindy Lee canceled her farewell tour in the spring of 2024, it was reasonable to assume we might never see her again. The drag queen alter ego of Calgary musician Patrick Flegel, Lee never seemed comfortable with the success of Diamond Jubilee, a bizarre, hauntingly gorgeous collection of hazy, psychedelic, and girl group-inspired doo-wop that became an unexpected hit and critical darling. Nor did Lee appear to enjoy performing live. "I feel like a caged effing animal," she said during one of the few shows she played last year. But there she was, some 18 months later, the reluctant savior of indie rock, gracing the stage at Massey Hall for one final Toronto show. You could feel the audience ripple with excitement and gratitude as Lee appeared, wearing a sequin gold dress, a black bouffant wig, and white go-go boots, wielding her electric guitar like a royal scepter. Alone on the stage, Lee moved efficiently through her catalog, swaying along to the music's ghostly rhythms and sending the otherwise hushed audience into a frenzy with each ragged guitar solo. As the show ended, fans filtered out of the venue, exchanging dazed looks, repeating the same refrain. "I can't believe that just happened," or a square by any other name. At a festive bash that featured rap performances, film screenings, pickup basketball, and a bevy of food vendors. Thousands of Torontonians gathered downtown on August 23rd to commemorate the grand opening of Sankofa, Sankofa Square, the public space formerly known as Yonge Dundas Square. Its reopening came 5 years after discussions began to rename the square, which honored the controversial 18th century Scotsman Henry Dundas, who played a role in upholding the transatlantic slave trade. The name Sankofa comes from the Akan people in Ghana and loosely translates into English as "Go back and get it," JC. This article is under investigations, and the title is She has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in psychology, but an unfair decision prevents her from practicing as a psychologist in Ontario. The case alleges an inflexibility system that emphasizes credentials over competence, leaving patients with less access to trained professionals. And there's a picture of a woman, and it says Swathi Swaminathan, and it's Swaminathan. Application to register as a psychologist 2023 was rejected over what she calls arbitrary, unfair, and discriminatory reasoning. And that photo was taken by Arlen McAdory of the Toronto Star, and this article is written by She Paradkar, Paradkar, who is an investigative reporter. Swathi Swaminathan has 3 graduate degrees in psychology, 2 masters, and a PhD. She has won international awards in her field and is published in peer-reviewed journals. She has taught and supervised undergrad trainees. But according to Ontario regulations, she isn't allowed to practice as a psychologist. Her master's degree in clinical psychology is from the internationally recognized Christ University in Bangalore, India, and her master's in psychology research is from the University of Oxford. Her PhD is from the University of Toronto. For the Ontario college that registers psychologists, that Canadian PhD was a problem. Swaminathan began her doctoral program at the University of Toronto in 2011. 4 years into her studies, a change in Ontario legislation moved the goalpost around that required PhD training to be a psychologist and did not grandfather its requirements. When Swaminathan applied to register for independent practice as a psychologist in 2023, a registration committee for the College of Psychologists and Behavioral Analysis of Ontario, CPBAO, then called the CPO, rejected her application. In a frustrating twist, had Swaminathan pursued her PhD outside of the country, she says she would have likely already been licensed and practicing as a psychologist here under the college rules. The experience has left Swaminathan feeling she is pitted against an inflexible system that emphasizes credentials over competence, stymieing capable experts and leaving Ontario patients with less access to care in a field already facing critical shortages. Swaminathan has challenged the professional regulators' decisions, calling them arbitrary, unfair, and discriminatory. However, the college has defended them as being in line with provincial regulations. Now, Swaminathan says she's being forced to choose between either leaving Ontario to practice elsewhere or staying on to work at a lower title and a significantly reduced pay. In quotes, yes, money matters, but I want to work to my true capacity. I also want to work in the public sector. And there aren't too many places that employ master's level clinicians, she told the Star. The college recently tried to address concerns over its low success rates for foreign-trained applicants, making changes it hopes will streamline registration and allow more psychologists to work in Ontario. However, the changes do not appear to address the issue of graduates like Swaminathan, who may have both domestic and international training. The college told the Star it cannot comment on individual cases. The college is committed to ensuring that all Ontarians can access safe and competent psychological and behavioral care, it said. New regulations change requirements. When Swaminathan undertook her PhD in 2011, Ontario regulations stipulated that a psychologist could have a doctoral degree from a program of study with content that is primarily psychological in nature. That changed in 2015 when the new provincial regulations established 13 specific requirements for graduate psychology training, one of them being that an applicant's doctoral program clearly states its intent to train professional psychologists. These registration requirements were, in quotes, non-exemptable. The regulation also required doctoral programs offered within Canada and the U.S. to be equivalent to a doctoral program accredited by the Canadian Psychological Association, while programs outside Canada and the U.S. could only be substantially similar to it. The College Registration Committee examining Swaminathan's application did not consider all her graduate degrees together, saying her previous master's degree was not part of the degree program relied upon for registration. Focusing exclusively on her PhD, the college found it lacking. It determined that the University of Toronto described the PhD she did in its brochures and website as a scientific research program. In quotes, the program is not intended to train professional psychologists, the college continued. This results in the absurd, arbitrary, and discriminatory situation where I am being penalized for coming to Canada to complete my PhD in psychology. It also found the program did not require the necessary professional practice training, such as a minimum 600 hours, a predoctoral practicum, or a predoctoral internship of at least 1,500 hours. The program also did not include graduate-level courses in foundations of professional psychology. However, Swaminathan says, had the entirety of her graduate education in psychology been taken into account, she would have met all the qualification requirements except how the university described its program in brochures and websites. Penalized for coming to Canada to complete my PhD. She appealed the CPBAO's committee decision with the Health Professions Appeals and Review Board, HPARB, saying the college's processes seem unable to reconcile an international trajectory like hers that involved training in 3 different countries, including Canada. This results in the absurd, arbitrary, and discriminatory situation where I am being penalized for coming to Canada to complete my PhD in psychology, she wrote. If I had not come to Canada and had received an otherwise identical PhD in psychology outside North America, I would very likely have been able to register with the college. The college told the board it had correctly applied the non-exemptable registration requirements. The college says it was correct in applying the updated regulations because they were in force when Swaminathan applied, and disputes that she would have been successful even under the old registrations. Swaminathan already has 600 hours of clinical practicum training during her master's degree and had thousands of hours of supervised clinical work experience in Ontario since completing her PhD in 2017, including a prestigious Banting-level postdoctoral fellowship, she told the HPARB. The doctoral psychology program at the University of Toronto was a combined master's and PhD program, she said. However, she was allowed direct entry into the PhD level of study because she was given credit for her clinical psychology master's degree from India and her experimental psychology master's degree from the UK. This was why she did not have the pre-doctoral practicum training attached to her Toronto PhD, she says. In addition, her status as an international student at the University of Toronto made her ineligible to work at the clinical extension program it offered. Federal regulations restrict off-campus work for study permit holders. When my training and experience were looked at in its full substance and context, rather than just assessing my degrees piecemeal, I have the training to be both a clinician and a scientist, she wrote. The CPBAO's committee encouraged her to apply to practice as a psychological associate on the basis of her master's degrees instead. Ultimately, HPARB rejected her appeal, saying it did not have the authority to overrule existing regulation, but could only adjudicate on whether an existing ruling was fairly applied. Non-exemptable requirements in the new regulation, the review board said, meant a doctoral study program had to strictly meet the detailed specifications outlined in the new regulation. Small reason for hope. Swaminathan has found small reason for hope in the recent highly public debates at the CPBAO on who could claim the title of psychologist in Ontario. The Office of the Fairness Commissioner, which monitors professional regulators in Ontario to ensure registration practices are transparent and fair for all, including internationally trained professionals, raised concern in its 2023-24 annual report about the CPBAO's lengthy and complex registration processes and low success rates for foreign-trained applicants, among other issues. In response, at a public meeting in December, the board of directors of CPBAO voted to make significant amendments to regulations on registration. One of the 3 recommendations it sent to the Ministry of Health was that the title of psychologist could be based on either a master's or doctor's degree. In the current system, professionals with a master's degree must practice under the title of, in quotes, psychological associate, while those with a doctoral degree can use psychologist. The scope of practice is the same for master's and doctoral psychology professionals, the college told the Star, and the proposed amendments would streamline the title of psychologist. The board chair estimated these changes would take about 2 years to materialize. And there's a correction to this article. This article was updated from a previous version to note that Swaminathan received a prestigious BrainScan postdoctoral fellowship, a Banting level postdoctoral fellowship through the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, not the Banting Fellowship. This article is about the Royals, the royal family's biggest highs and lows of 2025, from Andrew losing his titles to Kate's cancer remission. While not quite the fever dream or nightmare of 2024, this year has been eventful for the royals. And there's a picture of Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince William as they attend the Royal Variety performance at the Royal Albert Hall on November 19th. And this picture was taken by Chris Jackson. It's a Getty image. And this article is written by Sarah Lang, Laing, special to the Star. All being well, the third calendar year of King Charles III's reign will finish with the usual scheduled programming. A family parade to church on Christmas Day, the monarch's pre-recorded speech broadcast at 3 o'clock, and if they're keeping up with Queen Elizabeth's traditions, a game of Lucky Dip on New Year's Eve, where everyone reaches into a tub and pulls out predictions for the year to come. And while it's been less chaotic and frightening year for the royal family than 2024, a fever dream of serious illnesses for 2 of its top figures, made more dramatic by absurd internet conspiracies, 2025 has been eventful in its own way. From the scandalous, a disgraced prince stripped of all his titles, to the celebratory, the Princess of Wales remission and the King's cancer now requiring reduced treatment, to the only in Hollywood, a duchess fronting a Netflix show for the first time in royal history, Here are the 7 biggest headlines of 2025 for the royal family. Number 1, the former Prince Andrew stripped of his royal duties. This year, King Charles formally stripped his younger brother of all of his royal titles. This means that the person formerly styled as His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, Duke of York, is now known as just plain old Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He was also ordered to leave Royal Lodge, the lavish family property where he's lived practically rent-free for decades. While Andrew has been plagued by scandal and bad headlines for years, recently published entitled, this is in quotes, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York by Andrew Lowney is an exhausting catalog of this, ranging from the questionable business dealings to an endemic arrogance and self-importance. The catalyst for this public censure was Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir. Published after she died by suicide earlier this year, the book added fresh detail about Andrew's alleged sexual assaults when she was a teenager, who had been trafficked by convicted sex offender and friend of Andrew, Jeffrey Epstein. It was, in quotes, as if he believed having sex with me was his birthright, she wrote. While he settled a civil case bought by Giuffre for an undisclosed amount in 2022, Andrew continues to assert his innocence. Number 2, Kate Middleton announced her remission, returning to working royal life. After the absurdity of the hashtag Kate Middleton missing era, the Princess of Wales is probably delighted that her most viral moment this year was when the internet briefly thought she'd gone blonde. Otherwise, it's been a slow and steady return to public royal life for the Kate, following her announcement in January that she was officially in remission. In quotes, as anyone who has experienced a cancer diagnosis will know, it takes time to adjust to a new normal, she wrote on Instagram at the time. Quote, you think the treatment has finished and you can crack on and get back to normal, but that's still a real challenge. She said at an engagement at a cancer treatment center that same day. In finding that new normal, she seemed to keep a quieter, less public schedule than previous years, although that picked up toward the end of the year, which saw her play starring roles in 2 state visits, plus launching a new campaign for her early childhood foundation. Number 3, Meghan Markle launched a Netflix lifestyle show and a tie-in product line. What felt like far-fetched speculation when they left the royal family in 2020 has become reality in 2025. Not only did former lifestyle blogger and actor Markle return to television with a Netflix show about cooking and entertaining, she followed it up by launching a tie-in product line, As Ever. 2 seasons and a holiday special later, in quotes, With Love, Meghan, which premiered this spring, swiftly followed by a second installment filmed at the same time, was one of the year's most talked about shows. Whether that chatter equated to actual success is debatable. Yes, season 1 was in the Netflix top 10 the weekend it premiered, but it also spawned endless memes, many predicated on moments like repackaging store-bought peanut snacks as gifts or correcting Mindy Kaling that, in quotes, I'm Sussex now, when Kaling called her by her maiden name, seemingly tailor-made to be mocked by the internet. As Ever, her product line, was equally adored and panned. Its first few drops sold out quickly, even if some of the offering, notably edible flower confetti, was catnip to people looking for ways to ridicule her attempts to earn a living now that she and her husband don't have the royal family's financial and security backing. And while As Ever still seems to be a going concern, her Netflix show future is less certain. There's no news of a third season, and she is recently spotted making a cameo in a Prime production, suggesting she may have changed streaming alliance. 4. Prince William tells Eugene Levy he has changes in his mind for the monarchy. It's hard to say what was more newsworthy, the fact that Prince William appeared on Eugene Levy's travel show, The Reluctant Traveler, or gave him a tour of Windsor Castle, or the fact that he told the Canadian comedian that his vision for the future of the monarchy involves change. In quotes, I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good, he told Levy. It also apparently involves a softening of a stiff upper lip and sharing real feelings, as when he told Levy about how hard he found dealing with both his wife and his father's illness, and a candidness about how even royals are human, and when they told him that sleep was his favorite thing to do. Prince Harry got in hot water for wearing the wrong team's merch. For someone who lives in California, the Duke of Sussex sure spent a lot of time in Canada in the last quarter of this year. First, he was here for a few days of military-related events, including hanging out with Canadian veterans to mark Remembrance Day. A few weeks later, he was back in town for a paid speaking gig at a real estate conference, after which he was spotted eating sushi at Nobu with Ontario Premier Doug Ford. It's actually something that happened back in Los Angeles, however, that made the biggest waves when Prince Harry was in the 6th. That's because, despite being in line for Canada's throne, he was seen sporting a Dodgers hat while at a World Series game between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Los Angeles team. He was quick to admit the error of his ways, however, and begged the nation's forgiveness. Quotes, I was under duress. There wasn't much of a choice, he told CTV News. I was invited to the Dodgers dugout by the owner. I was doing what I thought was a polite thing to do. He claimed, having donned a Jays cap, that he was a true fan. Truthfully and jokes aside, this city will always mean a great deal to me, he added. 6. The Royals hosted Donald Trump for a state visit. One of the key ways that royals earn their keep is hosting foreign dignitaries, always at the invitation of the government of the day, not their own personal leanings, for states' visits. And while the pomp and pageantry is always a feature, Donald Trump's visit across the pond in September was a particularly notable exercise in wheeling out the old royal razzle-dazzle for the greater good of the realm. For starters, the U.S. president was extended the rare compliment of a second state visit, the invite from King Charles, hand-delivered by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, S-T-A-R-M-E-R, when he was in Washington to work out a post-tariff trade deal for the UK. Their assignment was to charm, and by all accounts it seemed the royals succeeded. What a place, in quotes, he said while touring St. George's Chapel, high praise from the real estate-minded Trump. The Princess of Wales played a starring role in the visit. Not only did she host the First Lady on her own for an engagement with some scouts, but she received particular attention from the president, who sat next to her at the state banquet and said she looked, quote, so radiant and so healthy and so beautiful in his speech. 7. Prince Harry and King Charles possibly tiptoed towards reconciliation. In September, the king and his younger son saw each other face to face for the first time in more than 18 months, much like Prince Harry's visit in February 2024, when he jetted across the Atlantic after hearing about his father's cancer diagnosis. It was not a long visit, just 50 minutes in a private tea, but it was interpreted as some sign that reconciliation might be underway, or, at the very least, active hostilities might have ceased. An improvement over Harry's disclosure in a BBC interview in May that he and his dad were not speaking. In quotes, he won't speak to me because of this security stuff, he told the news outlet after losing his appeal to get his publicly funded security detail reinstated. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 22nd, 2025 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Judy, and it has been my pleasure and honor to read for you. Thank you so much, and have an amazing day.